The train station buzzed with its usual morning chaos. The screech of brakes on tracks, the robotic voice announcing departures, hundreds of hurried footsteps echoing off concrete. Jessica tightened her grip on her coffee cup as she wove through the crowd, mentally rehearsing her presentation. The 9:15 to downtown would get her to the office with 7 minutes to spare, just enough time to check her emails before the big meeting. Her sensible heels clicked a steady rhythm against the tile, each step measured, controlled, efficient, just like her life. Then the world stopped. It began as a faint vibration in the air, a melodic ripple cutting through the station's dissonance. Jessica slowed without realizing it, her body responding to something her mind hadn't yet processed. Near platform 3, a young man sat on a bench with his eyes closed, headphones in, quietly reciting words that didn't sound like any language she knew, yet somehow felt more familiar than her own name. The Arabic flowed around her like water, each syllable carrying weight that transcended meaning. Her coffee hit the ground with a splatter no one noticed, because Jessica herself had frozen mid-stride. Commuters flowed around her stationary form as the verse, she would later learn it was, Ayat al-Kursi, wrapped around her ribcage and squeezed. Tears came without permission, streaming down her face in hot trails that mocked her usual composure. The station's noise faded until all that existed was this voice, these words, and something ancient waking up inside her. A businessman bumped her shoulder. "Watch where you're..." he began, then stopped when he saw her face. The reciter opened his eyes at the commotion, his brows furrowing when he found Jessica staring at him with desperate intensity. Later, he would tell cameras that in her eyes, he saw someone drowning who just found air. What happened next defied every social norm of the urban rush. Jessica stumbled toward him, her designer bag slipping off her shoulder, unheeded. "Please," she gasped, her manicured hands shaking. "Say it again." The young student, Mahmoud, removed his headphones cautiously, certain he'd misunderstood. But when Jessica collapsed onto the bench beside him, still weeping, he understood this was no ordinary moment. As Mahmoud began reciting again, something remarkable unfolded around them. The impatient businessman lingered instead of catching his train. A barista from the coffee kiosk stepped out from behind the counter. 3 teenagers silenced their laughter to listen. The security cameras overhead captured it all. How one woman's raw, public vulnerability created a sacred space in the most secular of places. By the time Jessica boarded her train 40 minutes late, she'd missed her presentation, but found something infinitely more valuable. The video footage shows her walking differently. Not the measured, controlled steps from before, but movements full of quiet wonder, like someone who just discovered the ground beneath her feet was holy all along. Her abandoned coffee cup still lay on its side by platform 3, its contents seeping into concrete cracks no one usually notices, much like how divine words had seeped into cracks in her soul she never knew existed. The station returned to normal within minutes. Trains came and went, announcements blared, but everyone who witnessed that moment walked a little differently too, carrying with them the unshakable truth that miracles don't just happen in ancient texts or faraway holy sites. They happen in train stations during rush hour, to people too busy to look for them, in ways too raw to fake. Jessica's presentation could wait. The meeting would be rescheduled, but awakening? That arrives precisely when it means to. The morning commute was supposed to be just another forgettable routine in Jessica's overscheduled life. She moved through the crowded train station like a sleepwalker, eyes forward, earbuds in, mentally rehearsing her quarterly sales projections, while her body navigated the familiar path on autopilot. The station's chaotic symphony of screeching brakes, chattering travelers, and blaring announcements had long since faded into white noise for her, just background static to tune out. Her focus was razor sharp: make the 9:15 train, review her PowerPoint one last time, nail the presentation before lunch. Efficiency was her religion, productivity her mantra, and this daily commute simply a necessary transition between 2 zones of controlled professionalism. Then the universe intervened with 4 ancient words: Allahu la ilaha ilahu. The Arabic verse cut through her noise-canceling headphones like a hot knife through butter. Jessica's body reacted before her mind could process. Her footsteps faltered mid-stride. Her hand flew to her chest as if catching a sudden pain. Around her, the commuter herd continued its mindless flow, oblivious as she became an island of stillness in the rushing current. The voice wasn't loud, just a young student quietly rehearsing Quran near platform 3. But its resonance vibrated in her bones with terrifying intimacy. This wasn't mere sound waves hitting eardrums. The recitation bypassed her intellect entirely, speaking directly to some primal memory in her cells. Jessica would later describe it as hearing a language my soul recognized, but my mind had forgotten. The station's concrete walls, the flickering departure board, even her own carefully constructed identity as a rational, secular professional, all of it momentarily dissolved in the face of this oral epiphany. Her $5.00 latte hit the tiles with a splatter as her fingers went slack. The scalding liquid splashed her stockings. She wouldn't notice until hours later. All that existed in that moment were the tears streaming down her face, and the terrifying realization that her entire worldview had just been cracked open by 30 seconds of a language she didn't understand. The young reciter would later say Jessica looked like someone who'd just remembered something vital after a lifetime of amnesia. And in a way, she had. The most carefully constructed walls of skepticism mean nothing when truth speaks in the mother tongue of the human soul. The words wrapped around Jessica like an invisible force, stopping her dead in her tracks, as if someone had pressed pause on the chaotic station around her. Her polished professional facade crumbled in an instant. Manicured nails digging into her palms, carefully applied mascara now streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. The businessman, rushing past, nearly collided with her stationary form. His irritated, "Watch where you're going," dying in his throat when he saw her face. Something primal was happening here, something that mocked the morning commute's predictable rhythm. Jessica's body betrayed her before her mind could catch up, knees buckling slightly, breath coming in shallow gasps as the Quranic verses vibrated in her chest cavity. Her rational brain screamed objections. She didn't believe in this stuff, didn't even understand Arabic. But her soul recognized truth in a way that bypassed intellect entirely. The young reciter, Mahmoud, would later describe seeing a drowning person who just found air in her wide, tear-filled eyes. For Jessica, it felt more like being struck by lightning while simultaneously coming home after a lifetime of exile. All her carefully constructed defenses, the skepticism honed in Ivy League lecture halls, the atheism worn like armor against her evangelical upbringing, proved useless against this direct heart assault. The station's fluorescent lights seemed to dim as the recitation continued, creating an intimate spotlight around this most public of breakdowns. Strangers slowed their hurried paces, some stopping completely, unconsciously forming a loose circle around what had become sacred ground in the most unlikely of places. A barista paused mid-let, her trained ear recognizing this wasn't ordinary crying. These were the shuddering sobs of someone being reborn. Even the ever-present station announcements seemed to hush as Jessica's trembling hands reached toward the sound, not in prayer, but in desperate recognition, like a child grasping for a parent's voice in a crowd. The universe had slipped her a note during morning rush hour, and the message was rewriting her DNA in real time. The train station's security cameras captured every surreal second. The perfectly coiffed businesswoman suddenly frozen in the rushing crowd, her briefcase slipping from numb fingers. Commuters flowed around her like water around a stone, some glancing curiously at the well-dressed woman openly weeping near platform 3. The footage shows the exact moment her polished armor cracked, when Quranic verses penetrated decades of agnosticism in one devastating strike. Mahmoud, the engineering student who'd been quietly practicing his recitation, initially thought Jessica was having a medical emergency. Her violent trembling, the way she clutched her chest, he nearly called for help until their eyes met. What he saw made him instinctively remove his headphones and start the verse again, louder this time. The Arabic words hung in the air between them, alive with centuries of devotion, as Jessica swayed on her feet like a sapling in a storm. Witnesses described how the station's atmosphere shifted palpably. The barista abandoned her coffee machine to listen. A group of teenagers silenced their laughter mid-sentence. Even the harried businessman who'd bumped Jessica earlier stood transfixed, his expensive watch forgotten, as the ancient melody worked its inexplicable magic. In that spontaneous circle of strangers, social barriers dissolved, executive and student, Muslim and atheist, all united by the raw humanity unfolding before them. The security footage shows Jessica's transformation in real time, her trembling hands first covering her mouth, then reaching toward Mahmoud in silent supplication. Her knees finally gave way on the word Ar-Rahman, collapsing onto a bench as the divine attribute of mercy washed over her. What the cameras couldn't capture was the seismic shift happening within, the crumbling of intellectual certainties, the awakening of a spiritual hunger she never knew she possessed. Because she only knew by the time station noise returned to normal, Jessica was already someone else. The echoes of the recitation still hung in the air as Jessica sat trembling on the station bench. Mahmoud hovered uncertainly, his Quran app now closed, watching as this stranger struggled to compose herself. What? What was that? She finally managed, her voice raw. When he explained it was Ayat al-Kursiye, a verse about God's eternal power and protection, Jessica shook her head violently. No, I mean, why did it feel like her hands fluttered helplessly near her heart as words failed her? Around them, the station's normal rhythm was resuming. Commuters rushing past, announcements blaring, but Jessica existed in a bubble of stunned awareness. The same hands that had typed countless atheist blog posts now clutched a tissue from Mahmoud like a lifeline. I don't believe in this stuff, she whispered, more to herself than him, wiping smeared mascara. The engineering student simply nodded, recognizing a soul in transition. Belief isn't required for truth to touch you, he offered gently, recalling his grandfather's wisdom. Their conversation stretched through 3 missed trains. Jessica's questions came in frantic bursts between shaky breaths. What did the words mean? Why this verse? Why now? Mahmoud had no answers, only quiet witness to her unraveling and reweaving in real time. When she finally stood to leave, her blazer wrinkled and hair disheveled, the security cameras captured something remarkable. Instead of heading toward the business district exits, Jessica turned toward the Islamic bookstore near Platform 7. Her heels clicked with new purpose, each step carrying her further from the life she'd boarded the train with that morning. The most ordinary of places had become holy ground, and neither she nor the dozen silent witnesses still watching from around the station would ever pass through quite the same way again. Jessica pushed open the bookstore's glass door, the bells chimed, startling her back to reality. The scent of incense and old paper enveloped her as she stood frozen in the entrance, suddenly unsure why she'd come. A kind-eyed shopkeeper looked up from stacking Qurans. "Can I help you, sister?" The term of address, so natural to him, sent fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Instead, she pointed weakly toward a copy of the Quran on display, its gold-embossed Arabic script gleaming under the store lights. The shopkeeper handed it to her without question, watching as her trembling fingers traced the cover. When she opened it at random, her eyes fell on Surah Ar-Rahman. "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" The words struck her like a physical blow. Jessica sank into a chair by the window, oblivious to the passing commuters outside. She didn't understand the Arabic, but the translation in the margins seared into her. He created man and taught him speech. A sob escaped her. All her years of debate, her polished arguments against faith, none of it mattered now. The truth had bypassed her intellect entirely, speaking directly to a part of her she'd long ignored. The shopkeeper placed a steaming cup of tea beside her. "Take your time," he said softly. She looked up, expecting pity or preaching, but found only quiet understanding. In that moment, Jessica realized this wasn't about converting or rejecting. It was about remembering. She left the store hours later, the Quran tucked under her arm. The train station buzzed around her, but she walked through it differently now, no longer rushing, no longer numb, The world hadn't changed. She had. Jessica stepped back into the train station's chaos, but nothing looked the same. The Quran pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat as she moved through the crowd. No longer a faceless commuter, but a woman walking the razor's edge between two lives. The fluorescent lights overhead now seemed harsh, exposing the spiritual poverty she'd mistaken for enlightenment all these years. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls from the office, panicked texts about her abandoned presentation. But the device might as well have been a stone in her pocket for all she cared. Near platform 3, she paused where her coffee had spilled hours earlier. The stain was still there, a faint brown mark on the tiles. She knelt, running her fingers over it as if it were sacred ground. This was where the veil had lifted, where the voice of the divine had sliced through her carefully constructed reality with surgical precision. A janitor pushing his cart gave her a curious look, but Jessica didn't move. Let him think she was crazy. The world needed more madness like this, more people brought to their knees by truth in crowded, ordinary places. When she finally boarded a train, it wasn't the one to her office. She rode aimlessly, the Quran open on her lap, her fingers tracing translations like a blind woman reading Braille. Passengers glanced at her, the disheveled professional whispering over Arabic script, but their stares couldn't touch her. The words were alive, vibrating through her in waves, rewriting her from the inside out. And we are closer to him than his jugular vein. Her breath caught. All those years of arrogant disbelief, and God had been this near? By evening, she found herself outside a mosque, its minaret cutting through the twilight. The call to prayer echoed down the street, the same melodic tones that had wrecked her that morning. Jessica stood, frozen at the gates, her knuckles white around the Quran. A woman in hijab smiled, holding the door open. No questions, no conditions. Just an invitation. Jessica crossed the threshold. The tiles were cool beneath her bare feet. The scent of rose water and worn carpet filled her lungs. And when the prayer began, she didn't kneel. She collapsed, her forehead meeting the ground as her soul finally came home. The station had been the beginning. The bookstore, a bridge. But this was surrender. Some awakenings take lifetimes. Hers took one verse, one stranger's voice, one ordinary morning when the universe whispered, "Remember." And she did. This story isn't just about Jessica. It's about you. About the moments God whispers to us in train stations, bookstores, and the quiet corners of our lives. It's proof that truth doesn't need permission to break through. It arrives when and where it wills, leaving us forever changed. Thank you. Thank you for watching, for letting this story stir your heart. If you've ever felt a sudden pull towards something deeper, if a verse or a stranger's kindness ever cracked your defenses, that wasn't coincidence. That was divine timing. We want to hear from you. Has a moment like this ever stopped you in your tracks? Share your story below. Your words might be the sign someone needs today. Like and subscribe if you believe in miracles in ordinary places. Spread the light. Share this with someone who needs a reminder. Truth finds us exactly where we are. The Quran doesn't just speak, it reaches. Thank you for being part of this story. Your openness might be the next chapter in someone else's awakening.